with so little. I therefore appointed people to my administration on the basis not only of their skills, but their character. They needed to be people of integrity who were there to serve. They needed to work with the government money without wasting a cent. The priority I chose was education. I was inspired, ladies and gentlemen, by the words of the United States President Franklin D. Roosevelt, who led his country through both the Great Depression that took place and the World War II. With the wisdom of experience, President Roosevelt said, and I quote him, he said, "We cannot always build the future for our youth, but we can build our youth for the future." Can I repeat that? He said, "We cannot always build the future for our youth, but we can build our youth for the future." Unquote. I was inspired also by my mentor and uncle, Dr. Pixley, SADESMO, who founded the oldest liberation movement in South Africa in 1912, the African National Congress. Dr. Seme was married to the eldest daughter of King Dinizulu, my grandfather, maternal grandfather. So Dr. Seme was a highly educated man, having studied at Columbia University in the United States and Oxford in England before studying in the Netherlands, studying law in the Netherlands. He had gone to the United States as a 16-year-old boy and returned as an erudite attorney of the Supreme Court. It was people like Dr. Pixley Seme, educated, knowledgeable and well-read, and shared the struggle for freedom that we waged as black South Africans. The question during apartheid was how we could prioritize education in the midst of so much need and in the face of deliberate strategy to keep black South Africans uneducated. Under my leadership, the Wesel government got creative. We instituted a rand for a rand. In other words, the shoestring budget, which we had for the government of KwaZulu, from that we took a rand, and I appealed to Amakosi that our people must also match that with a rand. So we instituted a rand for a rand fundraising system, where everything the community raised was matched by my administration. With that money, we built schools, houses and community centers and clinics. All in all, we built more than 6,000 classrooms, which I think is a remarkable achievement, even by today's standards. It was during this time when I received advice from the Zambian president, Dr. Kenneth Kaunda. You know, there was a big debate at that time because the external mission of the ANC abroad came up with a policy of imposing economic sanctions and disinvestment on South Africa. And they said that by that way, they were actually fixing up the apartheid regime. They said that they were actually planning the downfall of government by doing that. So, although I was a member of the ANC myself, I disagreed with them. And there was a big debate which was promoted by African Americans, and it took place in some of the countries of Africa that were free at that time. And I was invited to Addis Ababa, to Ethiopia, when the Lion of Judah, King Haile Selassie, was still the emperor of Ethiopia. And at the same time, they invited Mr. Tambo from the external mission. They wanted us to participate in the debate. So Mr. Tambo, as my leader, actually asked me to meet him in Kenya, in Nairobi. So we stayed right through the night with Mr. Tambo, at the Hilton Hotel. Because Mr. Tambo said it would look very bad if the two of us went up to Addis Ababa to promote different viewpoint, to differ on an international foreign platform. So he said, as my leader, I should proceed to Ethiopia, Addis Ababa, but that he would remain in Kenya. Kenya was just about to celebrate her independence, and it was going to be done the following week. He said he would wait for me there. So I proceeded then to Ethiopia, where the debate took place. I was received there by the Under-Secretary of the Organization for African Unity, a Nigerian, Dr. Peter Onu. I was warmly received, and of course, I argued that I think that it's wrong to impose economic sanctions on South Africa and think that by doing so, we're punishing the white oppressive regime. So, when I returned to Nairobi, Mr. Tambo was there. It was at that time then when I said to Mr. Tambo, since the apartheid regime in 1963 had confiscated my passport, I wanted actually to take advantage now that I was the head of the Zulu government, to go to Zambia to visit the Zambian president, Dr. Kenneth Kaunda, because I wanted to thank President Kaunda to thank him, because he and also President Nyerere in Tanzania had actually created a sanctuary. In other words, they allowed our exiles from South Africa, from different parties, to have sanctuary in their countries. Because all membership-based organizations were banned in South Africa. So I ran past my leader, Mr. Tambo, and he agreed that I should visit President Kaunda in Zambia. When I got to Zambia, I was warmly received by President Kaunda. I was accompanied by my wife, Irene. We had dinner in the State House with my secretary, Eric Ngubane, and Bani Dada, who was my minister. But then the president said to me, you said, look, tomorrow I would like you to visit our offices, the offices of my political party, UNIP. After I visited, I want you to come back to State House, that is the residence of the president, because I want to talk to you. Indeed, I went to see the UNIP offices with those who accompanied me, and I came back to State House. There in State House, I found President Kaunda, I found Mainza Chona, who was the Prime Minister, and the top brass of the leadership of UNIP was all there. President Kaunda then said to me, look, by we he meant presidents of the free countries in Africa, which were called frontline states. He said, we in the frontline states appreciate in South Africa that we are the only voice now in South Africa. We appreciate that. But I would like to say to you, while we thank you, we think it's not enough. We think you should go back to South Africa and start a membership-based organization. To reignite political organization, mobilization towards liberation. I was shocked. How can President Kaunda suggest to me, a staunch member of the ANC, to say I must start my own organization? I then consulted my leader, Oliver Tambo, and he agreed that I must go ahead. So when I go to South Africa, I consulted one of my mentors, and one of my mentors was a bishop of my church, Bishop Alpheus Hamilton Zulu. He was the first black bishop in the Anglican Church. The bishops advised me, as someone young and as a young leader, he said, look, if you try to organize another political organization, they'll ban it the same day. He said, your uncle, His Majesty the King of the Zulu nation, King Solomon Zulu, in 1928, which is the year I was born, he set up a cultural organization called Inkatha kaZulu. Why don't you start something like that and say we are starting not a political party, a cultural thing, so that he should not pounce on you and ban the organization? So I heeded his advice. I then founded Inkatha Yenkuleko Yesizwe, Hari Yapukuluku Yasitawa, National Cultural Liberation Movement, on the 21st of March 1975 at the Diocesan Center of the Anglican Church in Melmoth. So in 1976, it was only 1 year when the Soweto uprisings of young people took place, which is remembered today as June 16th, where white policemen killed our children with live bullets, where our children were answered with pelting them with stones. In the aftermath, I think our organization, the ANC, thought they were being bypassed by children. So all of a sudden, Mr. Tambo announced a new policy in exile, an aggressive strategy against Bantu education. He then launched a slogan, liberation now, education later. In other words, he called on black students in South Africa to abandon classrooms and to burn down their schools. I disagreed. I was ANC, but I disagreed with that. That is what happened across the country. But in KwaZulu, where I was chief minister, we disagreed. We believed that education was the means to achieve liberation, and that a generation that abandoned education would have no pools to administer in New South Africa once liberation was achieved. So Inkatha, therefore, launched the slogan, our slogan, to counter liberation now, education later, was education for liberation. So our schools in KwaZulu were stayed open, teachers were teaching in our schools, learners were learning in our schools, and education became a priority in all KwaZulu schools. Looking back, I have no regrets. In fact, I'm very glad that we did what we did, because many South African prominent leaders of today were produced in those schools across KwaZulu. I remember how Dr. Ntato Motana, a medical doctor, the chairman of what was called the Soweto Committee of 10, and Mr. Percy Kaboza, whose newspaper, The World in Johannesburg, had been banned by the apartheid regime, they came to ask me to make arrangements for their children to come to KwaZulu schools because there was no education in Soweto. So Karabo, his son, and other children came and arranged for them to be educated at Gwadlangezo High School. That's where they got their education. When Inkosi Albert Luthuli and Ms. Oliver Tam asked me to accept the leadership of KwaZulu, in spite of the fact that the ANC was opposed to homelands, it was really an act of genius from my point of view, because it gave us an opportunity to undermine Bantu education from within. We use English as the medium of instruction in schools, because you know what triggered the uprising in schools was that the apartheid regime in Pretoria forced African schools to teach children in two languages, in English, half in Afrikaans, as medium languages. But we were able in KwaZulu to teach in English, because I was in the head of the government. We used English as the medium of instruction in our schools across. ensured a level of excellence. Children, even from townships, flocked to our schools at that time. In my own life, I've always believed that my most valuable years were years when I spent being educated myself. It is not surprising that the teaching profession as such contributed to the liberation of our people more than any other profession that I know. When I look back, talking to you as young people, I remember that in the early years, Professor Z.K. Matthews, my professor, was the first black principal of a high school at Adams College, south of Durban. Later, he taught at the university at Fort Hare, where he taught me law, where I was a student. At the same time, he was the chairperson of the African National Congress in the Cape Province. I recall that he, that is Professor Z.K. Matthews, and Inkosi Albert Luthuli were colleagues at Adams College, where Inkosi Luthuli was a teacher before being called to lead Amakholwa in Gloutville as Inkosi of Amakholwa tribe. Albert Luthuli, Inkosi Albert Luthuli, was the last President General of the African National Congress, who was at the helm at the time of the banning of African political organizations such as ANC, PAC, AZAP and others in 1960, after the great massacre of our people by the police through bullets. I also, think of Mr. Oliver Reginald Tambo, whom Inkosi Albert Luthuli sent abroad, overseas, to launch the ANC Mission Exile. Before qualifying as an attorney, Mr. Oliver Tambo was a teacher of mathematics at St. Peter's College in Resortenville in Johannesburg. Many well-known figures such as Kgosi Lucas Mangope of Bophuthatswana, Advocate Joe Matthews, who was my colleague in Nkatha, and many others were the students of Oliver Tambo. When I cast my eyes further north at Tanzania, I see Dr. Julius Nyerere, the founding president of Tanzania, was a teacher. In fact, throughout his life, he was referred to as Mwalimu, which is teacher in Swahili. Even the founding president of Zambia, President David Kaunda, at one time was a teacher. And looking back to our own country, the founding president of the Pan-Africanist Congress and a contemporary of mine at the university, Mr. Robert Mangalisho Sobukwe, the founder of the PAC, was a teacher at Standerton before going on to become a lecturer at the University of Witwatersrand. I mention to you young people these illustrious figures of our liberation struggle to emphasize to you that without education, our people would never have been liberated. We needed education as a tool to leverage our own freedom, and that remains the case even now. We need education for our progress. Let me speak now for a moment about the University of Zululand and its roles in the struggle. When the apartheid regime took over in 1948, took over the country during the election, when that happened, an amazing thing took place. My University of Fort Hare, which was the only black university that existed, and it served not only South Africa, but even students came from East Africa, even from Kenya. There were ministers of state who became ministers later, who were with us at Fort Hare. But when the apartheid government took over, they said Fort Hare was for the Xhosas only. They said Zulus must have University of Zululand. I wanted my son to go to study his degree at the University of Zululand, my alma mater. They said, no, he's a Zulu. He must go to the University of Zululand. African liberation movement like the ANC, to which I belong, they were very, very disdainful about these new universities like University of Zululand. They call them tribal colleges. They try them, bush colleges. That should not be supported. And I remember one day my cousin, that is the grandfather of the present king, King Cyprian Nyangazizwe Peguzulu, Solomon, and Amakosi. We went to Zululand. At that time, there was not a single building. There were only embankments, which had been used as dormitories for Indian soldiers at the Gulf, at the bluff. The king and Amakosi and I, we supported